We are good to go. So, welcome everybody to the to the Global Azure Community Conference in Columbus. Woo! We did it. A little last minute because the Azure DevOps Meetup is still new, still growing, but we're going to do it better every year. So, I'm just going to do some brief housekeeping, then we'll get into our first speaker. Here's the schedule. It's been flashing on the screen earlier. It was in the meetup event. We are, don't worry, we have some extra time in here. Speakers should speak about 30 minutes. There will be 5 minutes between them. Feel free to go to the bathroom. We have coffee, water, sparkling water, and soda. The sodas are in the fridge now, so they may be cold when you grab one. No promises. And then we will have pizza later, but it's not out there yet. So if you're starving, good luck. We should go till about 6:15, and then we'll wrap up, do some networking here. Might move to a bar if anybody has a suggestion nearby that's not totally full of college students.
Or crew fans.
I mean, college students are fine. College students in bars near OSU campus after 7 on a weekend, maybe not. Is there?
It's going to be great.
I don't know anything about sports. I didn't know there was a game. Okay, so a couple housekeeping items. Columbus Azure is one of the presenters of this group that we are hosting it. Find us on Meetup, come to our meetups. We meet every 4th Wednesday in person at a variety of different offices around Columbus. The next one is this Wednesday. I do not remember the topic, but it'll be really good.
Dan King on endpoint vulnerabilities.
Dan King on endpoint vulnerabilities. So,
He's a Microsoft employee.
Nice. If you would like to submit a talk, we are looking for more speakers. So if you were like, man, this Azure stuff is so cool and I want to talk more about it, want to learn more about it, please come talk with us or submit through this link, which is why it's there. Code and Coffee, so that is the other co-host of this, Noel, who is out front directing people in. They meet in this office every other Saturday. It is, I think at this point, the biggest meetup in Columbus through sheer volume of people that come through the door because they have 40 to 50 people here every week. It's a great community. Strongly recommend coming out. They are also looking for sponsors because they have now started bringing in pizza and drinks to every meeting. So it's a good time, especially if you like kind of working with and mentoring younger developers. This is where younger developers come to ask questions. It's a really good time. Sponsors, Leading Edge is an awesome consulting firm that works in Azure and AWS. At least one of our speakers is from Leading Edge. They are highly recommended, Columbus area, well respected, and they really care about solving problems fundamentally. So check them out if you need tech solutions. Then that's the schedule again, which I believe is my last slide. Perfect.
Prizes.
Oh, prizes.
We have 5 tickets to the Columbus Symphony, Mozart's Mass, on May 24th.
Oh, so apparently we have tickets for Columbus Symphony. I'm repeating because I have a mic on. Tickets for Columbus Symphony on May 24th. And we're going to give them out by?
Random number.
We're going to do a raffle later, so people online might be a little harder to get them for you. I think they're physical tickets, I assume.
You have to be present.
You have to be present to win. Sorry.
Drive fast.
Yeah, don't drive that fast. drive a reasonable speed. Yeah, and that we will now get into our first talk. Mike A, as he is known in the Columbus area, is right next. I will say all the speakers here are amazing. I think one of them has not personally taught me so far, but every single other one has actually been a personal teacher of mine, at least in one way. Mike A is amazing. He is the person that first introduced me to, ironically, AWS Code Whisperer and a couple of cool things with AI, and you're going to have a great time with him today learning about some of the new developments in AI on Azure. So I will mic off.
Yeah. So is it just, do I need to turn it on, or?
Yeah, you're good. It's on.
Oh, it's on? Awesome. Oh, tight. Okay. I'm just going to
plug this in.
Yes, I'd be happy to. Oop, not there, and over here. Excellent. All right. Awesome. Yes. Yes. Fun time to get started. So, hello everybody. So I'm going to be talking to you all today about this new paper coming out of Microsoft called AutoDev for automated AI-driven development. Now, AutoDev I don't know if anyone here is familiar with different automated agentic AI sort of frameworks, particularly Devin is one that came out recently. So anybody familiar with Devin here? Raise your hand. Okay, a few people. So this paper actually came out the next day after Devin's announcement, for anybody here who is coming in from that sort of understanding. So AutoDev specifically is what's known as a multi-agent agentic framework for development purposes, primarily as of right now. And the whole idea about it is, as you can see, you have your individual self as a user. You would then define an objective within a conversational manager, which initiates a conversation object for a set of agents to then be coordinated and set up to accomplish that objective through a series of tasks that can be defined within the agent scheduler, which sets up the different agents as well as has them running through these individual tasks. Now, once the agent scheduler has set up the agents, and by the way, you can configure all of these different agents and their accesses to different tools and configurations for what they can do within this sort of framework. But the whole idea is that you take the agents that then get generated from the agent scheduler and then have them go through and parse out the different tasks between the different agents through different prioritizations. I'm not going to get too deep into those for the sake of this discussion, but you essentially go through and you accomplish each of the tasks. So you have, the way you go about doing that involves the parser here, which essentially confirms and validates any potential commands that can be found for the individual agents to then use. And it just confirms that these commands are valid to then initiate a given command and invoke it for accomplishing each of the individual tasks towards the objective. And that comes in the form of output, which is then organized for the individual different commands that get invoked. So from the commands that get invoked through the parser, once those have been validated and invoked, you have a different sets of tools associated with each of these agents. So these agents can, say, be given access to do file editing. They can retrieve information on search commands or through different type of embeddings that can be applied for, like, calling in information externally or from within the repository itself. You also have build and execution commands to actually build and execute code within your given repository, in addition to testing, where you have maybe you want to run a singular test, multiple tests, an entire test suite, as well as any Git operations associated with your code repository. And all of this is ran through the evaluation environment, where you have a given state of the environment and as well as the code repository where all of this can get executed. And one of the significant benefits that you get with a multi-agent framework such as AutoDev is that all of this can be set up within a singular Docker container. So this entire environment can be ran within Docker on the cloud in a secure capacity, so external from any additional environments that you may want to have running. So all of this is to say that the value of AutoDev is that you have multiple AI agents that can act autonomously with supervision to accomplish both development tasks and potentially IT operations tasks as well. And that's kind of where I want to take this discussion as well. I think one of the main benefits that you get from a tool like this primarily goes into development first and foremost. You have a lot of different code adjustments, like file editing, maybe. So think about, has anybody here used LLMs before? That's another thing that I probably want to. Okay, so a good few of you here. So for people who are familiar with LLMs or things like GitHub Copilot or Copilot Chat, you have a large language model where you're typing in a request and receiving an output either in the form of code or suggestions. This sort of framework is taking things one step further, where you're actually letting the AI autonomously act towards making larger modifications beyond, say, an initial code suggestion or a quick swap out or just possible things that could be done, right? So what I kind of envision and what I think Azure might be capable of moving towards, given that all of the pieces are really there, since we have multi-agent frameworks independent of development, such as AutoGen from Microsoft, which is an open source multi-agent framework, I think that is built in to AutoDev as a part of this framework. What you could then do is leverage this, not just for the development side of things, but have it integrated through maybe a different Azure service. I have been calling it in my head like AI agents for Azure, or A3 for short. where you have this sort of mentality of leveraging these agents to do actions within Azure. Because right now we have some integrations of AI where it's similar to like a co-pilot setup where you have a lot of recommendations, maybe a few minor things that can be done, but nothing really significantly autonomous. Like, say for example, I wanted to adjust into my infrastructure as code. Maybe I have some ARM templates that I want to make sure are still properly right-sized and are not drifting in any significant capacity. Like maybe I want to have the AI agent be able to adjust those ARM templates to my given specifications. And then I'll maybe have some sort of review in that process, or I'll potentially go in there myself and confirm the changes that have been made by this sort of agent, right? So that could be a potential use case. A lot of infrastructure as code can apply in that same way. Say, for example, maybe you have some Terraform configurations. Mark, I know you're a big fan of Terraform here. Maybe you have some Terraform configurations that you want adjusted that you're just not really feeling like taking care of right now. They're relatively minor, but you can have the agent go in, just make those adjustments, send you like a PR to just kind of review, and then just run that through. And Terraform applied, you're good to go, right? So that's another potential case as well. And you can adjust the control and access for these agents within AutoDev, and just expanding that to a DevOps environment will, say for example, I have a set of credentials that I want to give this agent access to do specific actions on my behalf, right? Maybe you have a given identity associated with the agents or multiple agents by default that you can customize. And you can switch out the models at any given time, both in AutoDev and AutoGen, and in this new sort of service that I'm proposing here, this sort of potential future of DevOps development, where you have a particular model by default, like maybe the best model, maybe a model that is well integrated and specially customized for Azure and other types of DevOps work. And you could then leverage that in your given DevOps processes. So maybe you could have it set up to automate Azure monitoring, maybe have it, maybe set up these sort of budget alerts so I don't go over this given amount of money allocated for the different services that I have running for this application. Maybe I want to have security monitoring and regular code testing through Azure Sentinel, for example, and making sure that all of that is kind of properly coordinated and is easily accessible for the agent to use. And maybe I just have a particular agent or particular domain information that I can apply to the agent in addition to the given customizations provided through Azure that would then make it easier for the AI to have the contextual awareness to then apply the infrastructural changes as it relates to my business use cases or business objectives, if you will. So all of these things kind of exist as possibilities for being able to effectively integrate AI agents in a way that still provides a developer or a DevOps engineer with significant amounts of control over their ecosystem, but an extended level of control. Because one of the biggest problems you get with really any cloud provider is that the ecosystem is so large, it's very difficult to know enough in certain cases, or as much as you possibly can to really be able to leverage all of the tools in an effective and efficient way. But when you can define custom agents that understand a particular service to a T, or have particular agents coordinate between different services through the context and tools available through a multi-agent framework, and you can customize all of that for your given needs in your given cloud platform, you really can start to leverage the value of these agents in a way that still gives you significantly more control within the environment, within your provider, that you might not have otherwise had, maybe just due to your own lack of understanding of the given services available and the full extent of what they could potentially do to solve a business task or a professional issue that you're running into with your infrastructure or within your code. So these are all things that I think are really going to be the future of DevOps over the next few years, especially as these models get better. You can plug and play them out as you see fit, bring in whatever model you find to be helpful, and just have all of that running and being your sort of one-stop concierge to Azure as your given cloud platform provider of choice. So with that all being said, I think that's pretty much the main stuff I wanted to cover in my talk. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I think you've done a really awesome job of describing all the various benefits of something like super cool and futuristic like this. Do you think that you could just go into just briefly some of the concerns or challenges that might be presented to the autonomy given to these agents?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think one of the big questions, thank you for that question, by the way, because there are a lot of potential concerns in the short term that I want to outline.
Repeat a summary of the question for the remote people.
Yes. So for anybody who's remote, who's watching, the question that was asked are what could be some of the potential limitations or concerns about applying this technology in at least the short term, but also potentially in the long term as well. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. So again, great question. I did want to emphasize that yes, currently as of right now, there are significant technical challenges. Like for example, within this paper itself, one of the concerns that I had, and one of the concerns that do generally exist for any type of agentic framework, whether it's AutoDev or Devin or different open source alternatives that you might find that aren't as well integrated into any given environment, is that they aren't really being rigorously tested for the type of work you would want them to do right now. And it's not to say that they can't do that type of work. It's just that the current testing, like in this paper, for example, was only done on human eval, which is essentially a bunch of like leet code level questions. And that like testing a bot on leet code level questions when you want it to do DevOps work is kind of like testing a developer on a bunch of leet code questions to see if they can actually handle being a production level software engineer or DevOps engineer, right? It's not.
So it's our normal interview process then?
Yeah, exactly. It's essentially just a normal interview process, but even then it doesn't really do as well as you would want it to when you have these types of like proper benchmarks on, say, solving GitHub code issues. Like the software engineering benchmark or the SWE bench is another type of benchmark where it's just having these types of models solve coding issues. And even Devin or some of the other open source models only get to like 12 or 13% when you apply them. So it's not the best at these type of things, and I wouldn't want to like leave it alone right now, but as models get better, that percentage will likely increase. But even if it gets to like 90% of being able to solve questions within those types of benchmarks, you still want somebody keeping an eye on it, because that's 10% of the time where things could go horribly wrong. And a developer will still need to be kept in the loop. The goal of this technology is to extend your capacity as a DevOps engineer within a given cloud environment where you might not be as familiar. Ultimately, you're the one with the final call and the final say. This tool is just extending your ability for applying these things. But another point that I did want to mention as well is that the permissions question, what level of permissions do you want to give these tools to work, is really another big concern that you want to keep in mind. Like, you don't want to give it too much access to your environment. You still want to apply principle of least privilege, but you could also use these tools to manage principle of least privilege as well. Say, for example, you have an identity through Active Directory, or is it Entra now? Active Directory, Entra, like say you have an identity there and certain levels of access associated with that identity. Maybe you want to ask this agent to review all of your different identities and see if their access is rightly sized. Like, are there too many superfluous permissions for a given identity? And if so, which ones could we potentially remove, either due to their maybe not being used or they're not being particularly reasonable to give to a person doing a particular task with a given identity. So you could leverage these tools. And I would say that a problem that used to be the case that has been solved to an extent by AutoGen is the issue of non-determinism. I think the way AutoGen handles this through caching is really useful, because once you've completed a task successfully, as long as that task doesn't change, you can just call the cached process for doing so. So you don't actually have to run the LLMs again to accomplish the same task and run into potential non-determinism. And again, I think that's a really good benefit of AutoGen, which is a part of AutoDev. They've kind of built it in, baked it in to a certain extent for the multi-agent element of this framework. Yes, Drake.
So following up that, are there any situations where it could actually use a cached answer and just improve upon that instead of generating the answer fully from scratch? Just because if there's already a validated answer, I would assume that editing that might be a higher likelihood of success than generating the answer fully from scratch.
Yes, there are multiple ways you could go about setting that up with a caching system. That's an excellent question. So just to review really quickly for anybody watching remotely, the question that was asked is, if you have a cached solution, is there a way that you can iterate on that cached solution or make it better or improve upon it or apply it from there? Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah. So that being said, yeah, there are a lot of ways you could go about doing that. Like some of the open source projects I reviewed in the past had just a JSON file with all of the different actions being taken by an agent. And you could literally just edit parts of that file to streamline the entire workflow process that had already been essentially cached for that previous example. Now, I don't believe that's how it's set up for AutoGen. but you could apply something like that, or just have a system where any superfluous commands could be cleared out, or anything where there are certain iterations that don't go anywhere, just detecting that within the cache and then tossing it out, and then having a much more streamlined workflow. Or again, you could just go and manually have you have a means of going in and manually editing a file, like maybe a JSON file or a YAML file that has each of the actions taken within a given cached workflow. So there are different ways you can go about doing it. Again, this is highly customizable, and that level of granular control is really what's going to help developers leverage these tools. Yes, Kemming.
Oh, hey, thank you so much, Mike, for the wonderful presentation. Do you want to ask, so it seems that the problem originated from these, big cloud platform having way too many options and puts human developers into analysis paralysis, or but without the big terms and the fancy names. So one way I agree is to have an AI expert to help you with this. But would you say that this, or do you see this as a window of opportunity for also new cloud contenders to contenders to come up with simpler yet as efficient, as versatile options to these big players that have millions of options and nobody gets happy by the end of the day?
That's an interesting question. So for everybody who's still watching remotely, the question that was asked...
We're making the audience now.
Oh, awesome. Okay. So with that, thank you for the question, Kemming. So I do see opportunities for potential disruption, not just within Azure, but in other cloud providers as well, where how you potentially leverage these new agents and this new AI technology to essentially make it easier to navigate your cloud platform, or to streamline certain processes in navigating your cloud platform. That option does exist, not just for the current players, but for potentially new ones who want to get in. But ultimately, one of the biggest barriers for a cloud provider is the capital expense of setting up a bunch of data centers. So that, first and foremost, is what you have to consider. If they haven't done the groundwork of the capital expense that goes into setting up these different data centers with all of the appropriate infrastructure, you can't really set up a proper cloud environment that can leverage all of this. So I would say primarily, I can see a lot of the major cloud platforms, such as Azure, such as AWS, such as Google Cloud, even Oracle. They all have the potential opportunity to leverage this technology to streamline these processes. But I think Microsoft, and particularly Azure, are in a good position for leveraging these technologies because they have all of the integrations, they have all of the framework tech associated, they have the model access that they need, and all the deals associated for additional open source models. So I think Azure in particular is in a very good position to leverage this sort of streamlining through these AI agents and these multiple AI agents within their given cloud platform, as opposed to the other cloud providers who are still just trying to catch up either on models or on frameworks to leverage multiple agents or just agentic models to begin with. So it's one of those things where there is opportunity, but certain players have a better starting point to leverage those opportunities than others. And that's, like I said, I think Azure is definitely first in line with regards to this tech.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions?
Hello. I have a basic question, which is, from your perspective, what do you think is the advantage of Azure over AWS? And I have talked to the recruiter here, and they talk that AWS is actually more common in Columbus than Azure.
It's an interesting question. So, I mean, there are different things that each of the cloud providers do very well that I can appreciate. I don't think that one cloud provider wins out among all the others necessarily. I think, for example, AWS is really great if you are a developer trying to do infrastructure and operations tasks. Like, it's a lot more dev-oriented. Azure is a lot more functional in certain ways. Like, if you're a network engineer, you're going to appreciate the the private cloud options, the virtual private cloud options that come in with Azure on that side of things. You're also going to have more functional understanding of the different services just by the names alone. Because Azure, one of the things that they bring to the table are functional names that you know what the service is from reading it. Like, yeah, SQL database. Okay, then my SQL database.
Elastic Beanstalk is so clear.
S3 is great. It's blob storage, right? So it's. Again, it makes it kind of easier to pick up Azure in a lot of ways if you're coming in without an IT or a dev, or if you're coming in with a dev background in terms of the functionality of things like naming conventions and certain tool sets. Like Active Directory has a lot more intricacies that can make it more robust and customizable, or Entra, again, name change, sorry. But yeah, you have a lot more customizability in terms of identities and through tenants and all that. So there are different things that services excel at. CloudFormation it's interesting from AWS's side of things. I like the infrastructure as code options there, but with Terraform, you really get a lot more customizability for infrastructure as code, so you don't really need to focus too much on the cloud provider. But that's neither here nor there. Each cloud provider has their pros and cons and what you can get out of them. So ultimately, the main focus is to consider that, right?
5 minutes.
Oh, 5 minutes. Oh, I mean, I can call it now. If anybody has any other questions? I hope that answered your question, by the way. Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Then I will wander back up. You will see far too much of my face. Thank you again, Mike. It was great talk.
Thank you.
I don't want to clap on the mic, so trying.